I have a 2004.5 Duramax LLY. I am building my Duramax for longevity, so it lasts the longest I can possibly get out of it. I'm not going to blow the head gaskets up doing crazy stuff with tunes and all that. I am using quality parts. Rather than do everything 3 times, rather than replace the air filter and then go for the whole tube and then do the mouthpiece and have to take this off like 3 times in between, I'm going to show you guys what I'm doing to get it all done at once. So today I'm going to do an EGR delete, complete delete, pull the cooler out, coolant line, install SMB intake all the way up, and the turbo mouthpiece with the resonator delete, because these are prone to crack and let dirt in the motor. EGR just puts dirty exhaust right in the motor. Why would you want to put dirty black soot right in past your air filter into your turbo and right back into your motor? Why would you? I don't understand how that could possibly be good for your motor. So that's why we're deleting it, and we're gonna do that all at once so we don't have to take everything apart 10 different times, and you know, things break over time, so we're just avoiding all of that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the mass airflow sensor. This is a T20 Torx. It's got to have the little hole in it for the lockers. Pull that out careful. You can blow it out a little bit, but that's a pretty sensitive sensor there. We pull that aside. This kind of just will wiggle out. I already pulled all this off because I'm doing it with one hand and probably couldn't show you guys. With a flathead screwdriver, you just undo this clamp a little bit, undo this one, pull the resonator off. This is a T30 that holds the resonator on. You can pull this tube off, then we're down to the mouthpiece, turbo mouthpiece right there. So after we get all that out of the way, you're going to take a pair of needle nose, pinch this together. This is the crankcase breather, so this is putting oil right in your motor. It's fine, it's not, you know, bad or anything. We're going to reuse that. You're going to have to, let me get the light in here. This cable that's sitting right on this turbo, you're going to have to pinch that with needle nose right underneath and pull up at the same time. Get enough room. There's a clamp right on the back side of here on the turbo housing, and you're going to have to loosen that. I used a flathead screwdriver from this way, got that loose. Once all that's out of the way, you can pull this piece right out. You can, you know, that's a lot of oil residue, which isn't bad for your motor, but we'll get that cleaned up a little bit. Put a new piece on here. You can. This is kind of important. This is the turbo. We could do a turbo wheel right now, but there's no real reason to. This turbo, you know, you feel it, you know, how tight it is, how freely it spins. This turbo feels really, really tight. There's not much movement in here. Side to side, you know, it seems to spin pretty good without any issues, so we're going to leave that alone. We're going to cover it up so when we're working on the motor, we don't get any dirt in there. So that's basically everything to do the SMB intake and the turbo mouthpiece, but we're going to start doing the EGR now as well because we like to save time and I only want to do things once. We're going to loosen this up. This is an 11mm. You're going to need a deep well for that, and then the rest of the 6 bolts remaining here, I took them off already. They're on studs. There's 2 on the back, 2 on the front, and then 2 up here where it goes straight into the motor, a bolt and a stud. And you're gonna have to move this piece out of the way. That's, you know, not really that important. It's just a sensor holder. You're gonna have to hold this back and kind of wiggle it out of here because it's fairly, you know, it's a little challenging getting them off that studs, especially with that one at that angle back there. But you know, pretty easy. My truck has 159,000 miles on it, and there's, you know, a decent bit of sludge, built up carbon in there. That's going straight into the motor. You can see where it's, you know, nice and clean going in here. Then where it gets injected, it just keeps getting worse and worse, and that's going right into your motor, guys. Okay, so what you're gonna need to do next is you need to unplug the sensor. We're not gonna reuse this. We're gonna tape it up and tuck it away later. But this is your EGR valve. This opens and closes depending on the ratio. It dumps, you know, exhaust only certain amounts, but I mean none is good. So we're getting rid of this. I pulled the two 15mm bolts out here and here. I also loosened the two bolts and two studs in the back. They're both 12mm. Studs on top, the bolts on the bottom back here. It's actually fairly hard to get to, but I mean, I just used weird combinations of tools, and the hardest one here was the back corner. There's one here, and then one underneath that one. I was able to use a wrench with another wrench on it, cheating, and actually this worked out very well for me. I actually used just the socket and the ratchet. This is the Craftsman ratchet. I highly recommend getting a ratchet with high teeth. This is an 84 teeth, so you'll be able to, even if it's got it small, you can still get it moving, you know. You don't need all that room to just get that one click. Very frustrating with low teeth ratchets, but that's for our next step. But I actually pulled out the two 12mm. I was able to get the ratchet on this one and use a wrench on the one down at the bottom right there and pull this EGR valve out. As you can tell, it's, you know, fairly dirty. This is where the exhaust comes up in through there, the hole on the side here. It's actually fairly clean for the miles that are on this truck. I'm quite surprised. I've seen a lot of Duramaxes a lot worse with a lot less miles, and I know this one hasn't been replaced, so everything on here is original stock, you know, from the factory. You might see something else zip tied up, you know, I mean, that's a new brake booster, but that's basically it. And then we're going to drain the coolant out a little bit because we're going to have to remove these coolant lines. This is an EGR cooler. Cools the exhaust gas going in the motor. So we're going to drain the coolant real quick. Not all the way, just a couple quarts. Alright, so draining the coolant. I'm on the passenger side of the truck. There's this plug up in there under the radiator. Alright, this is the front bumper and all that. And you kind of just... I did it from underneath the truck. Now it's kind of hard to see. My phone's getting wet. But I just drained about a gallon, so I'm going to go ahead and stick the plug back up in there. It's just, you know, just screw right in. I'll have to tell you ready to loose it. I had to use a pair of pliers to get it loose, but that's about it. So for the EGR cooler, there's no real way to avoid getting coolant getting dumped, but you're gonna have to take this clamp off. It was right up on here. I got this clamp off, but there's not enough room to pull it off, so you actually have to pull the whole piece off the studs and lift it up over this piece right here and just push it back. So you can push it back and you can kind of finesse this piece off. I know people like to cut them. I kind of want to avoid that. Just a lot cleaner like this. We're gonna have to pull this off right here, and that's where our new line's gonna connect up top here at the firewall. Be careful not to, you know, yank this too much. That is a plastic piece actually in there. You have to get it from the dealer. I got this off. It came straight off, you know. Just don't go wiggle it up and down, just go straight back. You might need to turn it a little bit. And they gave hose clamps for this blue hose, but a lot of people said they pop off and fall off, so the factory made these clamps for a reason, so I just reused them. I took two off and put them right back on there, so I don't think we'll have any problems with that. I'll let you guys know. I'll do a little review on this as well, all my components. I'm just doing a little preparation work, trying to clean up the seals down here so we can get a good seal on there. They included high temp silicone, which I'm right over here. I'm reusing the metal gasket and I just laid a thin layer of silicone down. And for the intake elbow, they give you a little plug for a boost gauge. I used some thread tape over here, put that in there. And I'm definitely going to be using the thread locker that they included. High strength thread locker, pretty awesome on the bolts. I'm just working on cleaning this up a little bit for the elbow, and then I'm gonna connect it down to. Alright, so we got the locker plate on. I added to the lock plate the bolts. You're gonna use the two shorter bolts for up top. That is 13mm head, and the two longer bolts for the bottom because there's a bigger spacer in there, and those are actually 12mm. I just tightened them down the best I could, and we'll let the silicone dry for about 12 hours before we start. Next, I covered up the EGR cooler plug, the actuator, I believe. Then I put the inlet elbow on, bolted that down nice and snug, silicone all in here. You can see the two bolts I used. I used thread locker on all this. Kind of skipped ahead here, I know. I ran out of time. My phone battery died. But for the SMB intake, you pull the air box out. You remove the air tray in the bottom. It's 5 10mm bolts. Then you put the box in. Put the 4 bolts that they supply. And it's pretty much just plug the sensor back on, screw it back on, bolt it up to the mouthpiece, make sure all these clamps are tight. You don't want to be sucking in dirty air. And I will give you guys all a review on if I get a code, how it works out, anything I needed to change. Alright, well, I'm doing a update on the EGR delete, the SMB intake, and the turbo mouthpiece. So I have a fully stock, except for the exhaust, LLY. I have put, I don't know if it's backwards, but 882 miles on my EGR delete, mouthpiece, and intake. And as you guys can see, I have no check engine lights. Surprisingly, I was really expecting an EGR code to appear. Now that we have everything done on the truck and no check engine lights whatsoever, I would recommend the EGR kit. The SMB intake does not add any noise. I can't really tell a difference in horsepower. I mean, I'm sure there is an increase because the original one was quite restrictive, but was it worth $270? In my opinion, no. Was the intake elbow worth $130? It depends on EGTs. I do not have an EGT gauge, but I was told that was dramatically decreased. EGR, yes, that was worth $54. I would do that again. I would actually pay $154 for that. The Sinister one is $400. This one was cheaper. It's the same exact thing. What you need to make sure is you clean out the intake elbow, because that they tapped a hole for a boost gauge or whatever, and there's all kinds of metal shavings clear coated in the inside. So I ran a rag through that like 4 or 5 times to get all the chips out. That's the only complaint I have about that. Other than that, it came with everything else. Everything matched up perfect. The hardest part was taking the cooler out, and that was fairly easy. I mean, honestly, it took me 4 hours to do all 3 things. And in my opinion, it makes me sleep better at night knowing that my truck's getting fresh, clean air, not, you know, putting exhaust right back in that motor. I think that's just the dumbest thing ever. Let me know what you guys think. If I missed anything, go ahead and comment. Let me know. I mean, what I should do next.